Welcome back to the 68th online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, live streaming from our meditation center in London. Last time you saw me, we looked at blessing number 26 on regularly listening to Dhamma teachings. With the Dhamma talk today, we'll continue in our series on enlightened living to the first blessing in the Instilling Oneself with Higher Virtues subsection, that is, number 27 on patience. This session will run to about an hour and 10 minutes, starting with a 20-minute talk to define patience, its levels and characteristics, then 30 minutes of meditation and 20 minutes on how to cultivate patience. Having acquired the basic virtues for the mind in Group 7, culminating in regular listening to the Dhamma, which was blessing 26, to cultivate oneself further on the Buddhist path of progress, it's necessary to instill oneself with the higher virtues such as patience, openness to criticism, seeing the sight of a true monk, and regular discussion of the Dharma. There's a major distinction between the basic virtues described in Group 7 and the higher virtues described in Group 8. The basic virtues of Group 7 are concerned with making ourselves receptive to what we hear during a Dhamma talk, and this is the major purpose of the virtues of respect, humility, and gratitude. However, the objective of Group 8 is more demanding. Even after the explanation of various sorts of Dhamma in Group 7, we may still not understand them until we see them exemplified. We might be able to understand how to keep the precepts from a Dhamma talk, but we might not be able to comprehend how they can bring happiness until in Group 8 we come across the serene countenance of a monk expert in keeping the precepts. This is why the higher virtues of Group 8 are more demanding, because they are interactive virtues, especially patience and openness to criticism, which imbue us with readiness so that when we eventually do meet up with a monk, any discussion of the Dharma we have will be fruitful. Without these two interactive virtues, if the monk should attempt to point out a profound truth which conflicts with our worldview, or if too much is demanded of us, instead of improving ourselves, we might flounce away in a huff because our capacity for patience and openness to criticism is still insufficient. So this is how patience fits in with the interactive virtues of spiritual cultivation in Group 8 of the blessings. But so as not to get ahead of ourselves, at a more basic level, patience means keeping our cool in the face of daily hassles. It might be when your daughter takes forever to put on her shoes. It might be when the person in front of you in the drive-thru is apparently ordering everything on the menu. It might be when, as a deadline approaches, your work computer suddenly chooses to do a software update, or the copier has just jammed. It might be when you're stuck in line at the post office, or when a co-worker has missed the deadline for that project you're working on together. It might be when your 2-year-old is throwing a temper tantrum again. There are situations that try even the most patient amongst us. Patience is what you need when life's small and large annoyances make you feel like having a meltdown. We may vary from person to person when it comes to how much patience we can naturally bring to any given situation. But since you know the things that cause these annoyances aren't just going to go away, then maybe it's time to cultivate a little more patience on our receiving end. Patience draws our attention to the pitfalls of instant gratification. If you feel like you're becoming less patient in recent years, you're not alone. Cultural shifts, particularly when it comes to technology, have primed us to expect immediate gratification. When we want to read a particular book, listen to a certain tune, or watch a popular TV show, most of the time those things are only a few clicks away. An evening's dinner or a week's groceries can appear on our doorstep in a flash. So many things are available to us instantly. It's increasingly common that we get things delivered to us quickly. We all want instant gratification and want things without waiting. We expect packages to be delivered on the same day. We expect immediate results at the gym. We have food delivered to us pre-sliced so that we can get a meal cooked 10 minutes faster. We even have a book read to us or summarized for us so that we don't have to read them ourselves. And that's bad news when it comes to our ability to wait patiently. Our expectations increase in reverse proportion to our patience levels. A person's level of patience generally depends on their personality, their personal history, and the situation. Personality plays some role in explaining why some of us tend to respond more calmly to life's delays and setbacks than others. Studies have shown, for example, that people who are more conscientious, agreeable, and open to new experience tend to have more patience, and people who have fewer of those traits tend to be more prone to impatience. But these factors are definitely only part of the story. The habits we develop, ability to regulate emotions, and our expectations in a given situation all affect our capacity to respond with patience, as do situational variables like whether we're overtired, under the weather, hungry, stressed, or even overheated. We could all use a little more patience, especially in our fast-paced world. So maybe it's time to slow down and practice a little more patience. And since anger is not really mentioned or dealt with specifically in the 38 blessings, maybe this blessing, 27, is the time to learn how to deal with it. Even research tells us impatience doesn't seem to be productive in any scenario. Impatience in a person has been linked with that person's inability to handle stressors and practice self-control. In a 2016 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, showed that impatient behavior was actually linked to people having shorter telomeres, which in lay parlance is a part of our DNA that influences how our cells age, suggesting that being more impatient might actually speed up the aging process in our bodies. Research has also linked impatience with loneliness, higher incidence of depressive symptoms, and negative emotions. On the contrary, being a person who is more patient has been linked with positive things like life satisfaction, self-esteem, having self-control, and even being better able to pursue and accomplish goals. When a person is patient, they are calmer and therefore better able to keep persisting when it's difficult and avoid falling prey to goal disengagement. You're better able to know when to act and when to conserve your energy. Further benefits of patience, recognized particularly by Buddhists, include overcoming obstacles, being a foundation for other virtues, helping us apply virtues, and as a pathway to wisdom. To deal with each in turn, the first benefit of patience, to do with overcoming obstacles, is that it helps us not to backslide in the acquisition of higher virtues. Patience helps us to be prepared to overcome any possible resistance we meet, especially conflicts and temptations, in order to reach towards more subtle character qualities. In fact, if we are patient, we may start to regard obstacles as a challenge instead of meeting them with trepidation, and in time we can even come to relish them as a grist to the mill of spiritual cultivation. The second benefit of patience is as a foundation to every other virtue we hope to acquire. Patience is one of the most important qualities of mind we can possess, since it allows us to overcome the temptation to backslide or become dejected from our endeavors. So you could say that our every success, both in spiritual and worldly ways, is a monument to our staying power. Thirdly, patience helps us to apply the virtues we have acquired. No matter what task we undertake, our success relies not only on our level of virtues, but also our patience to apply our character qualities to their full extent. Lastly, patience is seen as a pathway toward wisdom. The Buddha praised patience as a virtue second only to wisdom. The meditation we practice as part of our lives gives rise to the wisdom that in turn will allow us to identify and overcome the impurities in our mind. But you could never attain that wisdom without a foundation of patience. The patience-in-patience continuum is therefore a good indicator of how we're doing in cultivating our mind. The root meaning of the Pali word for patience is kante, literally meaning maintaining one's normal state of goodness or productivity, a steadfastness equally unshaken by tempting or unpleasant obstacles. The characteristics, or perhaps purpose, of authentic patience is being able to put up with things, not lashing out in cruelty, not inflicting sorrow, while maintaining a joyousness of mind the whole of the time. To look at each characteristic in turn, the first characteristic of patience is the ability to put up with things. If someone insults you, reprimands you for something that's not true, or generally tries to provoke you, you don't take the bait, even if they're trying to push your buttons. Patience means continuing to do all the good things you normally do, with restraint of body, speech, and mind. It applies especially when someone has done you a favor in the past, but later does something hurtful. Patience may mean continuing to treat them well in spite of their slip-up. Supposing you realize you have some ingrained prejudices, by patience you would learn to keep your mouth shut and not allow your prejudices to express themselves in your speech and actions, while continuing to work them out of your system until no trace remains of them, even in your private thoughts. The second characteristic of patience is the ability to avoid lashing out in cruelty. In the practice of patience, we need to be able to keep our temper under control rather than getting angry, violent, or threatening. Those who lose their temper easily are obviously lacking in patience. There's a proverb the Buddha gave in response to the anger of Akosaka Paratavacha in the Samyutta Nikaya, and I had to double-check this because the most recent English translation of that part of the Tipitaka has glossed over some of the fairly important issues. The Thai Tipitaka, which has hundreds of years of commentatorial rigor, translates the proverb as, "Those angry in response to the angry provocation of others are the worst of the two. Those who don't respond angrily to angry provocation have won the battle, which is hard indeed to win." However, I had to double-check this because the Bhikkhu Bodhi translation just says, being angry back makes things worse for yourself. So, without wishing to inflict cruelty, if I might be permitted a quick sideswipe, which I would consider my duty as someone professionally involved with the accurate representation of the Buddhist teachings, if your study of Buddhism is completely reliant on translations in your own language, be prepared to miss out on huge and possibly important chunks of meaning from the Buddhist scriptures. But to come back to our topic today, at a more subtle level, avoiding cruelty even means avoiding allowing others to irritate you, whether it be provocative people or working in the hot weather. Irritation would be a sign that your level of patience is still lacking, not to speak of obsessing about getting your own back on others who have hurt you in the past. Third characteristic of patience is the ability to avoid inflicting sorrow on others. In other words, even though the hurt we bring may not be physical, we still need to avoid behaviors that bring tears, suffering, or mental hurt to others because of any patience that we might have for them. The fourth and final characteristic of patience is the ability to maintain joyousness of mind the whole of the time. We should regard it as our goal never to lose touch with our sense of contentment. Instead of blaming the weather, fate, or the economy, we need to try to do the best we can with what we have, maintaining our mind at 1 or 2 degrees of remove in order to keep our mood buoyant. We need to at least attempt to look on the bright side where possible, instead of grinding our teeth whenever we have bad luck thinking, "Why is it always me?" or "Why do I never get lucky like other people?" In addition to all these, patience also means focusing on your own business, especially your own personal cultivation and progress, instead of nosing into other people's business that doesn't concern you. In other words, you might need to have the patience to keep the precepts even if others laugh at you, and you might need to soldier on in your meditation patiently even if you haven't seen any significant rewards for your efforts. Of course, there are situations in life when it's not good to be overly patient, especially if it involves being patient, in inverted commas, in a checked-out, spiritless way, like standing by in the face of extreme injustice. In such cases, being overly passive is not a great way to be. Some may be familiar with the effigies of 3 monkeys often seen in Asia, one monkey with its hands over its eyes, the second with its hands over its ears, and a third with its hand over its mouth. This is a symbol of the ancient proverb advocating patience in the words, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Even though this proverb is quite well known, the meaning of the 3 monkeys has often been twisted by those who misunderstand patience. They say, even if you see unscrupulous behavior, then turn a blind eye. Even if you hear slander, pretend you haven't heard. Even if you know something fishy is going on, keep your mouth shut. For this reason, various unscrupulous actions such as corruption continue unabated as a result of the wrong sort of restraint by those who witness it. By the same principle, supposing a child is too lazy to study or help around the house, if their parent reprimands them and they remain unmoved and indifferent, is that patience? You could say the child is maintaining their normal conduct in the face of unpleasant stimuli, but it is not the cultivation of patience. In this case, it would be better referred to as stubbornness or ignoring advice. Supposing someone is so poor that they are about to starve, but instead of going out and looking for a job, they put up with the situation, calling it patience. In fact, they could show a lot more patience by showing the initiative to ameliorate their situation. Patience, as it is truly understood, should be a saving grace that helps us extricate ourselves from complacency, delinquency, or debt. The important characteristic of patience is that it should be founded on the basis of a radiant mind and not a clouded one. True patience ought to be the patience to extract oneself from and avoid all unwholesome states, to persevere in the cultivation of wholesome deeds, and maintain one's mind pure and radiant, not allowing it to become clouded. In a 2012 article in the Journal of Positive Psychology, research characterized 3 scenarios that would require someone to respond either patiently or impatiently, and Buddhism goes one step further to list at least 4 categories, adding patience in the face of temptation at the end. Just because you tend to be patient in one category of situations doesn't mean that you're going to be patient in all. For example, just because you're the type of person that can patiently listen to your friend's relationship problems doesn't mean that you're the type of person who isn't going to get frustrated by an unusually long line at the post office. And according to Buddhism, they ought to be regarded not just as different sorts of patience, but also sequential levels of mastery in the acquisition of patience. So, here we go. Buddhism describes patience on at least 4 different levels: patience in the face of life's hassles, patience in the face of life's hardships, patience in the face of interpersonal conflict, and patience in the face of temptation. To deal with each of these in turn, the first level of patience would be the sort you bring to bear in the face of daily hassles, which might mean impulse control in the face of traffic jams, flight delays, messy spills, tangled necklaces, or being put on hold with canned music by a call waiting system. It might mean endurance of hardships caused by the environment around us, such as climate or weather extremes. Second level of patience, which is a little bit more advanced, is patience in the face of life's hardships. For example, a chronic sickness or disability that you'll have to deal with in the long term. Everyone has to endure physical feelings to a greater or lesser extent. All you need to do is sit without moving for a few minutes, and already you'll start to get aches and pains. Although the instinctive thing would be to shift position, ironically, people can sit without complaint around a gambling table or a movie screen all night without complaint. Strangely, when it comes to sitting for meditation for a few minutes, the amount of patience we need seems grueling, but only because you lack patience in the face of life's hardships. The category of patience is especially important if we have physical health problems. It teaches us to avoid reveling in or exaggerating our suffering, or else we might make it twice as bad as it needs to be. Some people appear rugged in inclement weather and cool in the face of hassles, but they faint at the sight of their own blood, which means that patience towards life's hardships is more challenging than patience in the face of life's hassles. The motto of doctors in triage used to be, give priority to the quiet patients rather than the vocal, noisy ones, because for the patients with no strength left to cry out, you have no idea how much longer they will live. The third level of patience is the sort we bring to bear in the face of interpersonal conflicts, such as emotional struggles with a spouse, friend, child, or parent. It can also be regarded as patience in the face of mental suffering. It is a sort of patience where we come face to face with the anger, discontent, and denial implied by insulting words, unpleasant treatment or manners, pressure by our manager, insubordination by our juniors, and various sorts of injustice in society. Since the people gathered in a society are by nature diverse in disposition, it's no surprise that few come up entirely to our high standards and expectations. The moment you start to develop the social dimension of your life, if you want to get along with other people, you need to deploy plenty of this sort of patience to give others room for maneuver, because it can be guaranteed that the majority of people just love to please themselves without taking any notice of other people's feelings. The more people live in a community together, the more occasions there will be for conflict. People have different habits, needs, and backgrounds, and if they don't have the capacity to be tolerant of each other's differences, then conflicts will soon break out. Even if you possess all the forms of patience already discussed, but you lack patience in the face of conflict, you will fail at any sort of teamwork. Think about a married couple having a fight. The patient response would be to remain calm, hear each other out, and talk the problems through to a solution that works for both. The impatient response can be either getting angry, yelling, or lashing out without due thought. But impatience might also show up in a different form if partners ignore one another or disengage from their relationship, and that might be just as problematic. The fourth and highest level of patience for today anyway is patience in the face of temptation. This means patience to avoid succumbing to attractive or destructive things, which maybe you would like to do, but which are destructive. For example, touring nightclubs, gambling, addictive drugs, bribery, corruption, promiscuity, or bragging. Patience on this level would mean pushing back against the things that distract us from intentional living that we learned about in Blessing 21. For most of these things, common sense would teach us to treat any of these weapons of mass delusion with suspicion. However, as soon as you have had your first taste, your capacity to refuse is significantly compromised, whether it be games of poker, Class A drugs, or having your silence bought. The sort of patience that you need to overcome this sort of temptation is even more difficult to master than patience in the face of interpersonal conflict. Most regular meditators will no longer flinch if anyone comes up and insults them. For them, it's not much different from hearing a dog barking. However, even seasoned meditators might be taken in by a few words of flirtatious flattery from a spotty youth. And this is why there is a traditional Thai saying that not to be angry when insulted is hard enough, but not to be elated by flattery is harder still. The main message of Blessing 27 is that no matter how hard the obstacle, with patience on all four levels, we will be able to overcome them. So before we come to our meditation for today, we have time for a quick story about patience. It concerns a monk from the time of the Buddha called Puṇṇa, who had traveled from the south of India, a city called Sunaparanta, to meet the Buddha in the north. At that time, the south of India was less civilized than the rest of the country. There were reputed to be cannibals living in the forests, and all the inhabitants had a reputation for their cruelty to strangers. Puṇṇa had formerly been a merchant traveling in the north of India, but had the chance to listen to the teaching of the Buddha and was so inspired that he asked to ordain. He tried his best in meditation, but the foreign climate and the environment was not amenable to his practice, and he could make no progress. One day he came to take his leave of the Buddha in order to return to his home country and to try meditating there instead. The Buddha disagreed with his idea, reminding him, "Have you forgotten the cruelty of the people in your homeland? Will you be able to tolerate the people there?" Buddha replied, "I hope so." The Buddha asked, "What will you do if they insult you?" He said, "I will consider that being insulted is better than their beating me with their hands." "And what if they beat you?" "I will consider that being beaten is better than their throwing clods of earth, sticks, and stones at me." "And what if they stone you?" "I will consider that being stoned is better than their stabbing me with spears and knives." "And what if they stab you with spears and knives?" "I will thank them, because some people who want to die have to expend considerable effort looking for effective means to take their own lives." Hearing his answer, the Buddha was satisfied and permitted Puṇṇa to make the journey. And before long, meditating in favorable surroundings, Puṇṇa was able to attain arahantship and make an important contribution to spreading Buddhism in those wild southern lands. So now that we are a little bit more well-informed about the levels of patience we are talking about in Buddhism, let's bolster our resilience of mind by settling ourselves down for 30 minutes of meditation, which today is a recent live recording of valuing those hard-won moments in meditation. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. So if you'd like to start by finding a comfortable position for yourself in meditation, a position of poise by which you feel you could sit for a long, long time without having to move around too much. Your hands rest palm upwards on your lap, so that you have a fairly upright posture. And you can close your eyes very gently, in much the same way you might close your eyes to go to sleep. So to relax and to slow down, we start by taking a few deep breaths to ourselves, breathing in to the full extent of our lungs, before breathing slowly and smoothly out again. Once again, we breathe in the cool, refreshing air from around us. And as we breathe out, we may feel that we're letting go of any previous worries or concerns at the same time. From there, we take a few moments to make sure that all the muscles of our body are properly relaxed, a process otherwise known as a body scan, starting at the top of our head and working our way gradually down through our body, relaxing each and every muscle as we go. So we start by relaxing our eyebrows and our eyelids. Once again, making sure the way we've closed our eyes is as gentle as possible. Closed in much the same way we might close our eyes to go to sleep. As for the muscles of our face, we allow them to become soft, perhaps smiling slightly to ourselves, but taking care that our jaw is relaxed and that we're not clenching our teeth together. Before moving on down to relax the muscles of our neck. If our shoulders are tense, we allow them to drop to their natural height. Before relaxing our arms, forearms, our hands and fingers, so that as our hands rest in our lap, they seem to do so only very lightly. Continuing on down, we relax all the muscles of our torso, our chest, trunk, and the muscles across our belly. Before relaxing both of our legs, all the way down to our feet and our toes. Until eventually all the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes, there's no remaining part of our body with any sort of stress or tension anymore. If we do notice any tension remaining, then we do our best to relax it as far as possible, to leave us with a sensation that the whole of our body seems to have melted away into the atmosphere around us, leaving no sense of discomfort in our body anymore, so that we can turn our attention inwards to the sensation of warmth, well-being, and spaciousness within the space of our body. Something which by any other name we might call our state of mind. And our state of mind is also something that needs to be as relaxed as possible to pave the way for the meditation ahead. The usual way to relax the mind is by letting go of all the normal things that we tend to worry about in our lives. No matter whether it's thoughts of work, friends, family, or studies. We put all of these thoughts on one side for now, at least for the time that we're meditating together. If you do have particular things which seem rather important to think about, then again you can put them on one side for now, making a mental note that you can always come back to worry about them later. We also let go of any regrets from our past or plans for the future. And what that leaves us with is the present moment and the task in hand, which is a space in our lives that we've created for ourselves only by taking a great deal of trouble. It's not that often that we get to recharge the batteries of the mind. It's only by gathering together with our fellow meditators that we can really focus on making sure our mind is properly relaxed. So we try to make the most of this opportunity, bringing our mind back from 1,000 different things in the outside world to a single place of stillness on the inside, because it's almost as if on the inside there is a sense of peace. Somewhere at the center of our being, which was probably there all along, but which up until now we've failed to notice. But as we bring our attention back from all the distractions in the outside world, we engage with this inner feeling of peace more and more, to the point where the whole sense of peace on the inside seems to pervade every last molecule of our being, to the point where there's no space left in our mind for any other sort of thought. And when we feel relaxed and refreshed, both in body and in mind, very gently and using no effort at all, we can imagine that inside our body is just an empty space or a hollow cavity. Or if we prefer, we might think of our whole body as being transformed somehow into a sort of transparent bubble with nothing on the inside. For those who've been meditating longer, it may seem as if our body has disappeared entirely, leaving just some great empty space, but a space that we know is our own. But whatever form this inner space takes, the space within our body, again very gently and without rushing the process at all, we can remember back to that picture of the bright shining sun which we had a few moments ago. Maybe yellow or red in color, orange or white. But this time, instead of appearing in the sky, the bright sun appears within the space of our body, shining with a cool, clear light. A light which is soft, perhaps rather similar to that of the full moon, rather than the sun itself. And in the beginning, the actual picture may not be very clear to us, but we accept it anyway, even if it's rather vague. We hold that image in our mind as continuously as we can, for as long as we can, while trying to avoid letting the mind spin off into any other distractions. However, if we do notice that the mind has become distracted, perhaps by external noise, as soon as we realize, we simply bring it gently back again to the center of the body as before. If the inner object disappears, we can always think of a new one. And apart from that, we just maintain the object as continuously as we can for as long as we can. Possibly using our feeling in the case that we seem to feel the image rather than seeing it. The other possible problem that may come up in meditation is an excess of thought. And for many people, the stream of thoughts in the mind is almost continuous, to the extent that it's quite hard to find a single break in the thoughts, to give ourselves that sense of peace and quiet. In such a case, to open up a space between the thoughts and the mind, we might make use of something known as a mantra, which is basically a word that we repeat to ourselves silently, as if we hear the sound of the word coming up from the center of our inner object. The traditional mantra that goes with this meditation method are the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And we hear the sound of those words coming up as if like a silent music from the center of ourselves, from the center of the bright object, over and over again, gently encouraging the mind to become free of thought, while at the same time linking our awareness more closely with this point at the center of ourselves. And it's also worth mentioning that we need to be as gentle as possible with the mind while we're meditating, because any trace of force, any temptation to rush, needs to be put on one side as something which is not helpful for our meditation progress. What we need to use in the meditation is a sense of lightness, a sense of openness, and allowing things to happen on their own, rather than feeling that we have to create experiences in the mind. So now, for a few more moments in silence, we cultivate our attention at the center of the body, keeping it on target with our bright object at our center, possibly while also repeating the sound of the mantra to ourselves, Samma Arahang, for as long as there are remaining thoughts in the mind. So now we take a few more moments for us to practice on our own in silence until we come to the appropriate time. Again, if your mind wanders off onto other things, each time you realize, simply bring your awareness back again to the center of the body as before. If the inner object disappears, you can conjure up a new one. But if it changes, you just follow it in its new form. And your practice may turn into something more of an observation practice rather than a visualization as a result. If there are still thoughts popping up in the mind, and the thoughts are few and far between, try to take more notice of the spaces between the thoughts, and allow those thoughts to die down into silence all by themselves. But if the number of thoughts is too many to deal with simply by letting them become more peaceful, then we can always make use of that traditional mantra, hearing the sound of the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, over and over again in the mind, until our thoughts become more manageable. The important thing about meditation, apart from our gentleness with which we apply the mind, is a sense of continuity, a sense of consistency. We keep our mind on track in this way, lightly, gently and consistently, for a few more moments now in silence until we come to the appropriate time. Continue to keep our mind on track at the center of our body the whole of the time. Lightly, gently, remaining with whatever inner experience we have built up for ourselves as a result of the meditation so far today. And for those who feel able, at this point we can start with our practice of loving kindness, where we generate feelings of loving kindness for ourselves and for all other sentient beings in the world. In order to put ourselves in a suitable feeling of loving kindness and compassion, it may help to start with the image of a dear friend or a family member who we care deeply about. It could even be a pet that you care about. And you can imagine that person or living being is right there in front of you. And you can connect with the feeling of loving kindness that you have for them, and with the feeling of gratitude that they're in your life. And imagine those feelings growing and expanding outward from the center of your body, as if you captured that feeling of loving kindness and allowed it to spread through every single cell in your body, from the top of your head all the way down to the tips of your toes, radiating outwards from your center. And in this way we start by extending loving kindness towards ourselves, first of all, with the wish that may I be happy, may I be healthy in body and mind, may I face my difficulties with good grace and serenity, may I take care of myself in happiness. And taking note of these feelings of compassion, care, and kindness, we send these feelings towards ourselves with a sense of tenderness and openness. And as these feelings grow and radiate more and more outward from the center of our body, eventually to cover our entire body, we can imagine it forming something like a protective bubble. Nonetheless, we imagine sending these feelings further outwards still, reaching outwards to the people we care about, imagining them being uplifted in body, mind, and spirit, as they are touched by our loving kindness and the care and gratitude that we have for them. In this way we continue cultivating and generating the feelings of loving kindness, expanding them to the other living beings sharing the room with us, spreading the feeling of loving kindness outwards from our center, so that it reaches all those other people and beings. Further outwards we can extend the loving kindness to our friends and our family. We might send loving kindness to those in our community, even to those who we might not know very well. We might even share loving kindness with others with whom we do not see eye to eye. But we make the wish that may all of these people, especially those in our meditation community, be safe, be happy and peaceful. May they be healthy in body and mind. May they be able to face their difficulties with good grace and serenity. And may they experience peacefulness and contentment in life. And now we imagine these feelings growing and expanding beyond this room, outwards into the neighborhood, throughout the entire town where we live, and the surrounding suburbs. Imagining the many different people, our fellow townsfolk, extending good wishes to them and to every living being, whether it be those on the land, in the air or in the sea. We imagine sending our feelings of loving kindness across the entire country, further to the whole continent, eventually to all the continents of the world, extending around the entire globe, touching people and sentient beings on every continent. All those beings with whom we share our planet, including animals of all species, all living beings. And we imagine the feelings of loving kindness growing and expanding up into the atmosphere and throughout the entire universe. For a few more moments now in silence until we come to the appropriate time. Sappa Buddhanubhavena, Sappa Dhammanubhavena, Sappa Saṅkhanubhavena Sattha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gently finishing your practice. So to come gradually back to today's topic of patience, if we are planning to raise our patience threshold, there are generally two opportunities where we can make a difference: prevention of impatience before it happens, and de-escalating impatience that has already started to arise in the mind. And as you may have heard many times before, prevention is generally better than cure. So to look first at tips for prevention of impatience before it even happens, it is important to underline that you can get better at being patient. If you recognize that you have a tendency to get irritable, as long as you want to change, it is possible to change your pattern of responses, but you're going to need to practice. Contrary to what you might believe, patience isn't solely the domain of kindergarten teachers and saints. It's a skill that everyone can develop and strengthen. Some people have compared acquiring patience to training in athleticism or dance. Some people are naturally better at it than others, but everyone can improve with practice, no matter what baseline you start from. The same is the case with patience. With practice, you can get better at responding patiently. What's important to remember is that life is full of potential annoyances which are beyond your control. But what you can control is your response. So, how can you strengthen your patience muscles? The first step might be just to remind yourself up front that it won't be much fun at first. If you're going to grow patience, it's going to come from doing slightly uncomfortable things. There are around 5 tips for preventing impatience arising even before it gets a look in. So the first way to avoid impatience is to identify patterns in your triggers. Recognize when you're starting to feel heated and identify what emotion is at the heart of that response. Are you angry that you can't get home faster? Are you sad or feeling rejected because of a chip on your shoulder? Are you anxious that you're not going to make it to your appointment on time? There may be a pattern in the things that trigger your impatience. Also, because people have several tasks going on simultaneously in their head, they jump from one thought to another without taking the time to complete their thinking first. Our life feels constantly frustrated by interruption as we try to multitask, leaving us with a lack of space or clarity. It's better to become more mindful of our thoughts, dealing instead with one thought at a time, to help slow us down and remove the elements that stress us out. The second way to avoid impatience, even before it happens, is to reframe how we think about the situation. Put yourself in other people's shoes for a change, or try not to assume everything is about you. In other words, avoiding taking everything personally. For example, you might realize your coworker isn't purposely trying to miss their deadlines. They just have a lot on their plate. That cash register didn't break so that your grocery checkout would take longer, and the train wasn't packed this morning just to prevent you getting a seat. The third way to avoid impatience even before it happens is artificially to build tolerance for being a little bit uncomfortable. In other words, making yourself wait. Let other people go ahead of you in the line or in traffic. Resist the urge to scratch an itch. Don't act on every impulse to check your phone. A study published in Psychological Science showed that waiting for things actually makes us happier in the long run. You might start with something small like waiting a few extra minutes to drink that milkshake and then move on to something slightly more challenging. Gradually, you will begin to gain more patience as time goes on. The fourth way to avoid impatience even before it happens is to stop doing things that aren't important. We all have things in our lives that take time away from what is important. One way of removing stress from our lives is to stop doing those things. Take a few minutes to evaluate your week. Look at your schedule from the time you wake up in the morning to the time you go to sleep. Remove and skip 2 or 3 time-consuming things that you do that aren't that important. It's time to learn to say no to things that cause stress and make us impatient. For example, I learn languages daily on a cell phone app, but recently I lowered my stress levels by opting out of the leaderboard that forced me to compete against other learners for top totals every week. I still learn the languages, but I do so now at my own pace. The fifth and final way to avoid impatience even before it happens is to think with your purpose in mind. Don't lose touch with the big picture of your life. Sure, it's irritating that yet another job interview didn't land you a job at that new startup, but maybe working in a business that doesn't appreciate you wouldn't have been a great idea in the long term anyway. It'd be great if your toddler wouldn't protest about vegetables, but in the long term, a habit of balanced diet will be better for your family's health. Try to remember why putting up with whatever delay or frustration you're facing will ultimately help you to get to where you want to go. For additional tips for de-escalating impatience that has already started to arise in the mind, start with accepting your current circumstances. This may mean being stuck in traffic or stuck in a job you hate, but for now it's okay just to let it feel broken. It doesn't mean in the long term that you shouldn't look for opportunities to change things if you need to. It only means accepting your experience in the moment for exactly what it is, even if it's unpleasant. It doesn't matter whether it's a work project that's gone off the rails, a relationship problem, or an appliance in your home that is literally broken. If you can resist the urge to assume you need to immediately fix everything, it will stop the impatience from building further. The second way to deal with impatience when you're feeling rushed is to consciously slow down. You don't have to feel like a hamster on a wheel the whole of the time. Know that you can choose slow. Western culture tends to value speed, but there is also value to be had in doing things slowly and methodically. The third way to deal with impatience when it starts to arise in the mind is to be more playful. If you reconnect with your inner child, perhaps by singing around the house, being silly, or laughing at potential triggers, it will help you to take yourself less seriously. Fourth and final way to deal with impatience when it starts to arise in the mind is to try to be a better listener. Listen more carefully to what family members or other conversation partners are saying. Focus on understanding rather than on formulating your own response. No one says increasing your patience is going to be easy, but with daily practice, you will find that you're calmer, less frazzled, and more willing to give others the benefit of the doubt. and maybe even give yourself a break once in a while as well. It might be useful to remind yourself that patience is not necessarily the opposite of impatience. It may be helpful to think about patience on a spectrum. Patience is the ability to be calm in the face of adversity, frustration, or suffering, and in any given situation you respond with some amount of patience or lack of it. You might respond with moderate patience, a total lack of patience, which would generally mean overreacting where you have no ability to be calm, or with too much patience where you become stoically disengaged from the situation and have stopped caring. But wherever you fall on the spectrum, more awareness of the nature of the beast will help you to be a little bit less stressed and a little bit more happy and mindful, so isn't it worth trying? Additional advice on equipping ourselves in those trying situations comes specifically from Buddhist sources with 5 special approaches, which mostly involve having the patience to do the right thing rather than the easy thing, even under conditions of extreme duress such as torture, as was found in the Cultivated Jataka, but I won't do more than mention this in passing in case some viewers feel it's disturbing. So, the first piece of Buddhist advice on training oneself in patience is to reflect regularly on one's sense of conscience. If you bring to mind a sense of shame before doing unscrupulous things, even in private, or a sense of fear about negative karmic consequences from bad choices, patience will automatically arise, and if it doesn't do the trick, then, as mentioned in the previous blessing, we can bolster conscience by falling back on respect and gratitude to help us persevere and do the right thing. The second piece of Buddhist advice on training oneself in patience is, where possible, to transform negative emotions into positive ones. In case we are maltreated, by relativizing and reminding ourselves that things could be worse, we can elevate our level of patience in the face of hardship. Some people only like to meditate when they feel it is easy going for them to do so. On days when it doesn't feel quite so easy, or if it's not going well, often they make no attempt to carry on with the practice. Such people will be unlikely to make progress because they refuse to meditate at exactly the time when they need it the most. If you sit for meditation and find it's not going well as you expected, don't give up. Think instead, today all I can see in my meditation is darkness. Well, at least it's better than feeling dizzy. And if some days you sit for meditation and you feel dizzy, think instead, at least it's better than feeling aches and pains. And if some days you sit for meditation and feel aches and pains, think instead, at least that's better than having a headache. And if some days you sit for meditation and have a headache, think instead, at least it's better than having a fever. And such an attitude is equivalent to a boxer who rolls with the punches to avoid serious injury. A third piece of Buddhist advice on training oneself in patience is to practice meditation or mindfulness regularly. Start by being in the present moment and suspending judgment. You could do this by taking a quiet moment and bringing your mind back to your center wherever you are. You might notice what is pulling your mind off center and then ease your awareness back to its point of balance again. You might simply relax momentarily and say Samma Arahang under your breath. Failing this, take a deep breath and count to 10. This is the easiest way to help ease any impatient feelings you're experiencing. And if you are still feeling uncomfortable, take a walk to clear your head, and it will help you refocus on what's most important. Similarly, it's important to set aside some time each day to decompress. Meditation is the foundation of all sorts of patience. Patience allows our meditation to deepen because it builds up a buffer between body and mind. As our meditation deepens, in turn, our ability to be patient will be improved. So, to become better at patience, you need to train yourself in meditation continuously. Patience and meditation are like complementary virtues. Patience is like the left hand and meditation like the right. If the left hand gets dirty, it can be washed with the right hand. If the right hand is dirty, it can be washed with the left hand. And if both are dirty, they can be rubbed against one another to get both clean. Fourth piece of Buddhist advice on training oneself in patience is to turn a blind eye to provocation. The great abbot of Wat Phra Nam taught that sometimes we need to pretend our eyes are blind, pretend our ears are deaf, be as humble as a doormat while keeping our mind as steadfast as the earth itself. In other words, turn a blind eye to people who are trying to provoke you and turn a deaf ear to gossip. At the same time, you shouldn't look down on the humblest of work, nor be fazed by the roller coaster of life. To make use of some metaphors associated with the perfections of patience and equanimity, your mind needs to be like the earth, which doesn't recoil, no matter whether unpleasant or pleasant things are poured on it. And to remind you of another metaphor associated with the perfection of resolution, to have the patience not to downsize noble goals, you should be like a mountain that remains unshaken in the face of the winds from the four directions. The fifth and final piece of Buddhist advice on training oneself in patience in the face of injustice comes again from the great abbot of Wat Phra Nam. Sometimes you know that you're being mistreated, but to lose your temper about it would do nothing to help the situation. Usually, such injustice is the end product of a longer train of contributing factors, which are better dealt with calmly by such means as new legislation. So if you find yourself the victim of injustice, rather than letting it spoil your day, you can cultivate patience by not fighting back, not running away, and doing good deeds continuously. Not fighting back means if they insult you, then don't insult them back. If there is a fight, then there's always a winner and a loser, and even if you are the winner, you will still cause resentment. If they put an article of lies about you in the paper, don't confirm or deny it, or else you will look guilty either way. Maybe you should just have a private talk with the people you trust to help with damage control. Don't engage in mudslinging. Even if you publicize your response in the papers, they may twist your words to their advantage. Not running away is advised because whatever the truth, if you run away, it looks like an admission of guilt. Doing good deeds continuously refers to the transformative part of our patience. Don't give up, but maintain your quality of mind. Don't leave weak spots for your opponents to attack further. The initial accusation is only like the first punch of a boxing match, to see how the opponent will open themselves up to further attacks. Good in the worldly sense means carrying on with business as usual. As you continue, just make sure you do things strictly according to the book, in case someone tries to find further fault with your practice. In spiritual ways, don't go relying on others, but rely on the merit you have done. Merit is really the thing that helps people win or lose. So just make sure you cultivate generosity, self-discipline, and meditation on a daily basis, no matter how dire your circumstances. If you can manage to follow this advice, before long, you will overcome life's hassles without creating a confrontation, and you will end up winning over public opinion. If you can follow these 5 practices, you will soon be able to cultivate patience, and other virtues will follow. So for today, we will finish off with a scriptural story or two, which remain relevant in the era of reputations that are built or destroyed based on our social networks. Of course, the Buddha didn't have an online social network, but patience in the defense of reputation was as relevant then as it is now, because during the time he was alive, he suffered the equivalent of trolling by opposing factions that included competing religions and royalty. Needless to say, the Buddha overcame his rivals' accusations by deploying patience. The first incident concerning the Buddha's reputation centered around a woman called Ciñca Māṇavikā, who supported a competing religious tradition of naked ascetics. She was also young and attractive, the local beauty of Savatthi, and also a competitor for Lady Visakha, who supported Buddhism throughout her life. Then, as now, it was traditional to invite dignitaries to do the opening ceremony for local events. Buddhists would always invite Lady Visakha to open their ceremonies. The naked ascetics would always invite Ciñca Māṇavikā to do their openings. One day, because the naked ascetics were losing many followers to the Buddha, they enlisted the help of Ciñca Māṇavikā to create a scandal that would discredit the Buddha. In the evening, when the Buddhists were returning from listening to teachings in the temple, she would pass them in the opposite direction and make it look like she was about to sleep at the Buddha's accommodation. When they asked where she was going, she would say, to offer pleasure to the Buddha. In the morning, Ciñca Māṇavikā would pass the supporters who came to offer food at the temple. When they asked where she had been, she would say, bringing pleasure to the Buddha. She pretended to be on intimate terms with the Buddha, and eventually she faked pregnancy by wearing a concealed lump of wood over her stomach. Gossip started amongst some Buddhists who were still unsure of the virtue of their teacher. Some believed that the Buddha had got Ciñca Māṇavikā pregnant. After 9 months, many supporters were too scandalized to go to the temple anymore. One day, Ciñca Māṇavikā stood up in the middle of a sermon and asked, "Are you only interested in teaching others rather than paying attention to our unborn child?" If any visibly pregnant woman in India made such an accusation, she would instantly be believed. Many people got up and walked out. The Buddha continued to deploy patience. He replied, "Only the two of us know the truth of the situation." He didn't confirm or deny the accusation, and he was not angry. Ciñca Māṇavikā didn't know what to do next. She fidgeted irritably, and somehow the lump of wood slipped out from under her dress. In some scriptures, it said that some mice had chewed through the strings holding the lump of wood in place. Immediately, everyone knew the truth of the situation. "Have you given birth to a lump of wood?" some asked, but others were not so forgiving. They were going to punish her for libel. Ciñca Māṇavikā ran out of the gate of the temple, but as soon as she set foot outside, the earth split open between her feet and swallowed her straight into the lowest level of the unfortunate realms. Apparently in India, even to the present day, there are still 2 holes in the ground close to the historic site of Jetavana Temple, one where Ciñca Māṇavikā was swallowed up and a second belonging to Devadatta. Down to the present day, the soil of those 2 holes remains infertile to any crops planted on them. And just to throw in a second example from Māgandiyā, which is an example of the trouble the Buddha experienced from royalty, when Māgandiyā became queen because she had a grudge against the Buddha, she used her authority to undermine the Buddha's reputation. Wherever the Buddha went, there were hundreds of hired men waiting to insult him. They would follow him around wherever he went, shouting insults, until his secretary, the Venerable Ananta, couldn't stand it anymore. He suggested to the Buddha that they go to another town. The Buddha asked Ananta, "But what happens if in the next town there are also people waiting to insult us?" Ananda replied, "We should move on to yet another town." The Buddha said, "If you think like that, we will be looking over our shoulder for the rest of our lives. It would be better to solve the problem at its root. The roots of our problem are right here in this town. If we do good deeds and nothing but good deeds, within 7 days the problems will sort themselves out." After 7 days, just as the Buddha predicted, the hired insulters went to get their pay packet. They were supposed to keep their paymaster's secret, but when they were paid, they spent their money on liquor. They were no longer able to hold their tongues and start to boast where they had got their money from. When the cat was out of the bag, the people of that country wanted to start an uprising against Māgandiyā, and that was the end of the Buddha's trouble. So, this is a second example of the way the Buddha dealt with unpleasant circumstances requiring patience, mostly through the practice of equanimity. So, this session I have introduced to you Blessing 27 on Impatience. For my next live session online, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, we continue the second blessing of the 8th group with the blessing 28 on openness to criticism. For good measure, I'd like to remind viewers you can email your questions about meditation or what you've heard in the lecture to the email address that you can see spelled out in the slide, and I'll do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency as we continue to deal with the knock-on health and social effects of the pandemic. Maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will recognize the roots of impatience in yourself and be inspired to cultivate patience on all 4 levels I've mentioned. So for today, this is me, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for today. So long, folks, and stay safe.